wrote the first book to be a wake-up call that the front line in the attack on democracy are the states. That's where it's happening. We like to focus on the big DOJ cases, and we should, in D.C., but where they are making sort of nonstop progress, you mentioned with South Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee, Florida, they take over these state houses, gerrymander the hell out of them, suppress the other side, and that's where they can pass extremist laws that would never survive in Washington. They're too toxic. And so I do, when I named the book Laboratories of Autocracy, I thought, this might sound a little much for people. Well, it's not, and I hear the term now more often, but I still worry, and this is why I wrote the second book, most Americans, while they see it maybe more clearly, we're still fighting the battle of old. And until we get to the front of the battle, which is in states and state houses, and build an infrastructure that supports running in all those places, we're still fighting a battle sort of assuming the democracy's intact when it's in fact in sort of jeopardy in all these states.
I know if Joe were sitting here, he would absolutely love what you're saying, because he always says Democrats have to learn how to fight the way Republicans have always fought. And that's the case you're making here, which is you've got a soccer analogy.
Right.
Stop just being the goalie deflecting shots away. Go on offense.
Yeah, I mean, I say all the time, my sons are 6 and 9. They're playing soccer. I put in the book, my son Jack understands the team always on offense wins. And they're on offense in states and state houses. We're not even playing defense in many of these places. We have too many uncontested races. So they take shot after shot after shot. And when they score those shots, like Dobbs, the Dobbs case, the abortion bans, the other laws, our main response is, well, we need more U.S. senators. Now, I want more U.S. senators, too. But we are not obstructing the shots where they're being taken in these state houses. We're not even contesting half of the extremists taking them. And until we do that, until we bring accountability into these state houses, they won't stop doing what they're doing. In fact, they have every incentive to be more extreme until we get in there.
David, thank you so much for doing this series. So walk us through your resistance art project on Project 2025.
Yeah, thank you. And it's great to be with you all today. A few months ago, and this came out of conversation I had with several people, as well as my own reading of sort of how people were able to expose issues in the past, that sometimes Democrats make the mistake of we kind of run around and we want to simply throw out data and throw out policy. And often we just don't communicate well when we do that. And so when I started seeing all these bullet point lists of Project 2025 going around the internet, I thought, although those were better than nothing, that's not really going to cut it. If we're going to really get to people, and this is frankly what Republicans do better than we do usually, we've got to do better storytelling about whatever the issue. But in this case, what would Project 2025 actually do? I mean, to individual lives, what would it do in terms of, if all of a sudden, if you take Trump seriously about no vaccines in schools, what does it look like? What does it look like if you're told after years of trying that you can no longer get IVF treatment because of the far right's obsession with life beginning conception? And what is actual weaponization of the DOJ? How does that look in the DOJ if it were to happen? And so I thought, why don't I try and start writing some stories that capture that? Now, these are stories. They're about the year 2025, but they're all based on the precise promises being made by Donald Trump, the precise promises being made in Project 2025, the promises oftentimes that he's saying in stump speeches, as well as the RNC platform. So the point was to do an exercise of actually having people understand. And we've seen other people do this, the ads where a girl is being pulled over with her father driving her, that captures what it would look like to have the policing of these crossing states to get abortion care. My goal was to do the same thing. So, some people like to see things through TikTok. Sometimes they see it in different ways. And as you say, with art, in this case, both through a podcast and a book, my goal was try and capture what this would all look like so people don't forget it. And I'm obviously thrilled that we've been able to pull that off in a pretty short amount of time.
Yeah. So you wrote a novel, Project 2025, Up Close and Personal, and then you adapted that novel into radio plays starring some incredible talent like J. Smith Cameron, who plays Jerry on Succession, and a wonderful friend. And she's been on the show. She and I started a States Project group together, which is linked to in our Gaslit Nation 2024 Survival Guide. And so she does a really beautiful chapter that we're going to air here on Gaslit Nation on a woman finding out that she's been denied IVF.
Yeah, I mean, what's been amazing is, so at first I thought I'm just going to write this on Substack, and then people got interested in it, so I'm turning it into an actual hard copy book for anyone who's interested. But even more exciting, I had an outreach from someone from the Bill Press podcast. His name is Jay Feldman, who said, "Hey, I like this idea so much. Why don't we turn it into a series of episodes?" And so for all summer, and then he said, read by really famous people. And I thought, well, that sounds wonderful. I'd also love to win the lottery tomorrow. How's this going to happen? And the truth is, and J. Smith Cameron was a big part of this, we pretty quickly found that some of the most talented, you know this, some of the most talented people in acting also are massive democracy champions. And none bigger than J. Smith Cameron. She does the Stage Project group. That's how I met her a couple of years ago. She's just, she wore a band. She held a bands off our bodies first at the Emmys. So she's out there doing this stuff, and she and some others took a real interest. And so we've been very fortunate that a number of really talented people have agreed to read these chapters. And I'll just say, as an author who wrote the chapters, it really is incredible to have someone of her talent read them, because as much as I think I write an okay chapter, when J. Smith Cameron reads it, it is far more gripping than anything I could write. So it's really become a great partnership. We've got a number of other people that people will recognize reading chapters going forward. And Heather Thomas, who was another big democracy champion, best known maybe for someone my age as having starred in the original Fall Guy. But also really good on Twitter about voter registration. She read chapter 1, which is this terrible chapter about a protester who finds himself deported because, as Trump said, he thinks that they should all be deported. So it's been great to have so many people step up and be part of this.
Yeah, when Trump says he's going to deport 11 million people, that's going to be sadistically messy. Like, people are going to be dragged from their homes, from their schools. Neighbors are going to be telling on neighbors, Gestapo style. It's going to be an ugly, ugly bloodbath. There's going to be camps where people are sent intentionally to die, to be taken advantage of. It's going to be Stephen Miller's intentionally cruel border human rights crisis on steroids. Obviously, today in America, we have a lot of Americans already living with Project 2025. In Missouri, they fight for referendums. When the voters pass those referendums, the Republican government in Missouri ignores them completely. We have DeSantis following Orban's playbook in Florida, including passing an anti-gay law in Florida modeled off of Orban's in Hungary, and on the list goes. And of course, your beloved Ohio used to be a bellwether state, and now it's a Republican hostage state. So could you tell us, obviously, given your book, Saving Democracy, you outline a lot of this, including solutions. Where does in what forms today does Project 2025 already exist?
Well, two things. One, I appreciate you mentioning the deportation, because one of the chapters in 2025, and this episode will be read by some really well-known folks. In many ways, amid all the horrible things of Project 2025, the one that people really aren't thinking through is, what would the deportation of 15 million to 20 million people look like? And so this chapter, which is the chapter 6, episode 6, is playing out at a deportation camp.
Wow.
The scale. I mean, if you stop and think through the mathematics of the scale of 15 million people, that inevitably leads to one of the greatest human rights crises of our country, and really in the last century in the world, if they really do what they're saying they're going to do, if Stephen Miller and Trump get the chance to. And so that chapter, in many ways, is the most difficult of the whole book, because it plays out what a 10-year-old boy would experience in one of these mass deportation camps, and also what a soldier would experience who is being tasked to guard that camp. This soldier in this chapter realizes immediately, we can't do this. This is overwhelming, the numbers they're trying to move, and this is just one of hundreds. So that is a big part of it. But to your question, and I really I have in the same way you do, I have a lot of my readers are from the states that are going through the anti-democracy hell of being in gerrymandered red states. Missouri, Tennessee, Florida, Ohio, Indiana. We're all going through the same thing, which is, once you have no democracy at your state legislative level, the wheels come off, and there's this incentive to be extremists. And the simple way to put it is, and I think those listeners from these other places would agree, we're sort of living through Project 2025 at the state level. Attacks on public education, laws against, abortion or reproductive freedom that do not at all reflect the people of these states. I mean, even Kansas voted for reproductive freedom 60-40. Missouri is about to. Arizona is about to. Florida is about to. But in these broken state houses, they do the exact opposite. in some states like Ohio, really the absence of the rule of law. I mean, we have, as some may have heard or read, we have an amendment this November to end gerrymandering. Voting yes will end gerrymandering. The ballot makes you think that voting no ends gerrymandering. They've rewritten the ballot language in the way that Viktor Orban would, or Putin, to literally tell the voters on the official government ballot the opposite of what will happen. And the Supreme Court of Ohio, because now it's as partisan as the State House, said it's okay. So we are seeing, and so we literally have to support our citizen power, to have fair districts. We literally have to get people to not be fooled by what is clearly just misinformation on the ballot itself. This happened in Ohio last year, where they left the opposite impression of what the Reproductive Freedom Amendment would look like. They tried to do the same thing. This happened in Wisconsin. In Utah, a court just stopped the Utah legislature from doing the same thing. So it's getting to a point of lawlessness, abuse of power. The State House of Ohio violated the Constitution 7 times to get us the current districts, which are illegal by the Ohio Supreme Court, a prior court that wasn't the partisan court we have now. So it really is all a taste of what Project 2025 would do for the nation. We are living it in states like Ohio. And I know, as you said, we used to feel like a bellwether. We now are going through a downward spiral of extremism that doesn't reflect the people. It reflects a gerrymandered state house. And so Project 2025, in one simple way to think about it, is that would put at the national level this downward spiral we're seeing in states. Well, another way to think about it, I'd say, is, Tim Walsh sort of coined the phrase that JD Vance is weird, okay? Well, and it's true. He's weird. He's toxic. He's extreme. And I tell people, I don't know where he learned all this crazy talk about cat ladies. It wasn't in Ohio I've ever seen. But here's the real problem, back to your question. If you're scared of JD Vance's weird, I can show you hundreds of people just like him, equally weird, toxic, and extreme. They're not just talking. They're in state house majorities imposing that weird on all of us through laws. And one of the problems is we look at the national stuff and we can see what it looks like in JD Vance, but we too often don't look at our own state house and realize people just like him are literally our current lawmakers, often our own state reps. But because we don't see the big picture of democracy, we often ignore the fact that these are the people in our states making these laws. That's how we got Dobbs, was that kind of thinking in Mississippi. That's how we got the Texas abortion ban, one of the main authors of whom wasn't even opposed in his next election. That's how we have Mike Johnson. The guy's never been in a real election his entire life. Now he's Speaker of the House. So we have weird like JD Vance in office all over the country, in majorities, no filibusters stopping them, and they're imposing this stuff on all these states. So for those of us from these states, I think, can say to the country, trust us, you do not want this at the national level through Project 2025. It's bad enough in the dozens of states where it's already happening.
Absolutely. And so I have so many things I want to say about everything you just said. So 2 things. Number one, I want all of our listeners to understand that Viktor Orban, backed by Russia, edited Hungary's constitution several times. They passed several laws to basically entrench Orban in power, that it's extremely difficult to get rid of him now. So they use our laws against us. It's called law warfare. That's number one. Number 2, a great documentary that's a companion piece to David's work, his series on Project 2025, is Agnieszka Holland's award-winning film, Green Border, looking at the Trumpian government in Poland and how horrible they were towards the asylum seekers that were being intentionally dumped on their border by Belarus and Russia to try to flood the EU with immigrants and really further fan the flames of the anti-immigrant far-right party, the parties across Europe that the Kremlin funds. And so Green Border shows the horrors of what the Project 2025 immigration crisis will look like in America, what individuals are put through, and especially what the rest of us trying to help those asylum seekers are put through. And that was just a glimpse. So back to the point you just made, if these weirdos that are holding these wonderful states hostage, if they continue to ignore the will of the people, in what ways can and must the federal government step in to try to enforce the laws of the land, enforce federal protections?
Well, that's a great question. And I know the DOJ is doing that some, but I think the DOJ, Congress, the president need to see this as more of a threat than I think they even see it now. So in my first book, Laboratories of Autocracy, I have a chapter that kind of opens with, we have a clause in the Constitution called the Guarantee Clause. And the Guarantee Clause says the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. And by Republican form of government, the far right likes to run around and act like that as some kind of anti-majority, minority-run, extremist-run government. No, by the founders, by Republican form of government meant that the people are the sovereign and not the crown. And again, the Constitution says that the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government, that the people are sovereign. That is a power that I think the government needs to take more seriously. If you start to see in states like Ohio that the people in corrupted power through gerrymandering are rewriting ballot language to fool the citizens into voting against their own democracy, I'm going to start to say to you, that doesn't even look like a Republican form of government anymore. Or when gerrymandering means that state after state is literally, the state houses are voting for abortion bans, often or usually no exceptions, that a small percentage of their citizens agree with and the rest don't. That's no longer a Republican form of government. It's a hijacked government protected by gerrymandering, sometimes now protected by courts that are as partisan as the legislatures. And at some point, the federal government, I think, needs to do more. Now,